was great because I convinced one of my friends who was like a big fan of Nightwish to go with me. So it was like, hell yes, I got somebody to go because I wanted to go see Hellstorm and Blackguard. Because I had saw Blackguard previously open for OTEP.
We should just start the show. This is Audio Tapes and Visual Drugs. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing pretty good.
I'm terrible. I have a head cold. We're recording this the night before this goes up, so if the Patreon version of this is late, well, I'm sorry. I've been setting all my taxes stuff up, and I keep like realizing I missed a thing and having like I've rewritten my taxes forms like 3 times in the last 72 hours or so, and tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. I will be like doing my taxes with my tax lady, so I have to have everything right, otherwise I have to go all the way home and then go all the way back and do that again.
I still got to call the people who were handling my 401k when I was at Amazon. I have to get a 1099 because since I no longer work at Amazon, I decided to just cash out what little I had in there, which was around $169, which means that's income, even though it's already been taxed.
Let's just jump right into things that are even more about current times and not as depressing. Let's talk about Us Today.
Yeah, it's not a very depressing thing.
Well, Us Today is kind of a depressing thing, intentionally so, because of like the names of their tracks. But I'll throw a little like taste in the background. This was my selection this week. Us Today is a trio of drums, guitar, and vibraphone, based out of Cincinnati, Ohio. And they are best described as an avant-garde, post-rock, minimalism, jazz, and electronic music with a heavy emphasis on experimentation. Basically, they write weird tracks, and I like it. And it's bumpy, happy, like, fun music to listen to. For this podcast, we specifically just listened to their album Computant. They do have quite a lot of music in their discography, though, which I do recommend going through and having a peek at. But Computant specifically, I think, is a very nice kind of, like, it starts off almost jazz-like, almost like a post-rocky jazz, and it very much kind of just moves through almost like an audio exploration of us today, and I really like it a whole lot.
It's really fun listening to them. A lot of their tracks are very earwormy. They just get stuck in your head, and you're just kind of sitting there like...
They're very hummable.
Humming along, and then you realize you're not actually listening to the song anymore. I mean, that first track is amazing.
No funny game. Also, just the names of their tracks are pretty great. Like Best Unfriends, Sharon. I like Sharon. Sharon's just such a good name because it's like you can kind of imagine what you're doing, just scrolling down Twitter, scrolling Tumblr, whatever social media platform you're on, just clicking that share button. Just like browsing YouTube and sharing. And it fits, and it's good background music for computing.
My favorite name track on there is probably What Is Time Now? Good Morning, in all caps.
It's so true, though. Yeah, no, you could totally just, like, especially how connected we are online now, right? Like, you know, we're both lucky enough to be in the same time zone, but, like...
Kind of.
They're kind of in the same time zone because what is daylight savings? But it's, you know, I was playing games earlier with someone who just woke up in Germany and someone else who had, like, been up all night and all day, and I think is manically high right now. Yeah, like I said, this band is a very fun little audio explanation of, or exploration of Us Today, and, you know, I don't really have too much more to say about it aside from this band is very weird and maybe a little bit off-putting initially when you listen to it. Like, it's not the most accessible thing that I've recommended on here.
I don't know. I think it's pretty accessible mostly because, like, a lot of their songs just have such a happy tone to it.
But I could see some people maybe writing it off as like elevator music or
I could see that too.
Background noise. I would recommend giving it a chance, especially if you're turned off initially, because it's really cool.
Yeah, and they have a lot of music, so if you don't find a track that you like on Computant, you know, there's a lot of other stuff that they've done that might be more your jam. Because that's what I find issue with a lot of bands is usually when I discover them, they don't really have a ton of music, and half the time it all sounds kind of samey.
Mm.
Like they never like step their foot out of bounds. So,
No, I can see that.
but this band, because of their experiment focus, a lot of their stuff kind of changes with how it's what's the word, arranged.
And I think that, like, as you said, they do have a lot of music, kind of a shockingly large amount of music, considering that they kind of fly under the radar. They're not a band that I would immediately think of, especially when I'm, looking around for music. Like, they've been releasing music for almost 10 years now.
Yeah, and I've never heard of them.
Yeah, and they're just kind of sailing along the radar. Like, you look them up on YouTube, and the most viewed video that they have has like 7,000 views. So it's definitely an underrated, easy recommendation to go take a peek at. Since we're all about flip-flopping genres today, do you want to pitch your your pick for this one?
I chose Judiciary, which is a band I recently discovered, and they are an interesting hardcore band because a lot of hardcore these days, they're not in the roots of hardcore, which was kind of or at least modern hardcore, which is a more focused on like harsher vocals and kind of heavy music, heavy sake. Whereas the roots of older hardcore, when it started making the shift from like hardcore punk to what it is now, there was mixing of genres that kind of split off into two. So the two genres that split off was metalcore and hardcore. And these guys kind of thread the needle. They are very heavily influenced by, at least in their music, thrash bands, but they also have the more harsher vocals of like today's hardcore, where it's kind of just aggressive yelling. I'm surprised that it took me this long to discover them. I think when was their first release?
2014. Demo 14. But their first like actual full-length thing was 2016, January.
It took me 5 years to discover these guys.
I'm staring at their Bandcamp page. They're from Lubbock.
Oh, Lubbock, Texas. Nice. I believe I have family that live there. But yeah, I have a friend who is like pretty entrenched into the like Dallas-Fort Worth area metal scene. And he made a post kind of like a dream local show for him. He's also a promoter, so he like low-key was like trying to, and Judiciary was like at the top. So I was like, all right, I'm going to check these guys out, because he likes to send me a lot of bands that I might like. And Judiciary kind of popped out because someone had commented like saying, but they're a hardcore band. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to go check them out, because hardcore is one of my favorite genres. And I really liked what I was hearing. Again, because of the thrashy guitars. It sort of nostalgic, kind of when I first started getting into like thrash bands, and then it just kind of felt like an evolution of thrash that the old thrash bands didn't get to do because their fans are so entrenched. And
so I don't dislike this band, but I also don't really like them. They're kind of float in the middle of just something that I'm not particularly interested in. Hardcore is a genre that I've always found hard to get into, and I think we've talked about this before. And every now and again, I really like a hardcore band, but often I find myself going, "Nah," on them. I like thrash metal a whole lot. And so this band kind of rides the line of something that I would totally go see them live if I saw that they were going to be here, but they're not a band that I will go out of my way to listen to. I primarily listen to Surface Noise, their most recent release, which was released in January, but I also listened to Mortality Rate, and I gave Axis of Equality a single listen through. They're kind of like grindcore for me. I don't like grindcore, but if there's a grindcore show happening in Vancouver, I will go like that, because that's the kind of music I love listening to live. I don't really like sitting down and just listening to this type of music. I think they're very good at what they do. I think their song structure is pretty damn great. I like the composition. I like the heaviness of the guitars. I think it works. I just don't like the vocals. Like to me, it throws me off because I listen to it and I immediately want something that sounds more like thrash. But then they don't deliver thrash, they deliver hardcore, which is just the more screaming. And for me, it just doesn't work. I I don't hate them, but I can't really get into them.
Fair enough. Like that's honestly all valid criticism, especially of hardcore, because it is a hard genre to get into.
I would describe it as an acquired taste. I don't think hardcore is something that anybody just immediately grows up liking. It's kind of like thrash metal, like that, you know. Thrash metal is definitely an acquired taste. Not a lot of like it's your average Joe who's been listening to AC/DC and Metallica their entire life. You throw them you throw thrash metal in their face, and their response is disgust because it's not an easy genre to get into. And I think that hardcore is very much the same way.
I'll sit here and swear up and down that hardcore is like one of my favorite genres, but even I know it's not the greatest genre to introduce people to, unless they have like some semblance of what hardcore is.
Yeah, no, you have to really start people at the beginning. It's just like post-hardcore or any other intense genre. You really have to start somebody at the beginning and then kind of walk them into it. You know, for me, it was metallic metal and bands like Sonic Syndicate and fucking Nightwish that eventually drove me in the general direction of post-hardcore. But I, for whatever reason, like post-hardcore a whole lot, but you tell me to listen to hardcore and I just kind of squint at you a little bit.
You're like, what are you trying to get me into right now?
Yeah, and I think this band does a really good job riding the lines between thrash metal and hardcore. And if they were opening or mainlining at a thrash show, I'd be all down. Like that would be a rad show. But it's really difficult for me to sit down and listen to this type of music.
And I believe they're definitely a band that would not mind at all playing with other metal, like with metal bands, because they ride that fine line.
I love bands like Havoc, for example. You know, some of my favorite like local groups are all thrash metal bands. Like we have a very big thrash metal scene in Vancouver.
I don't know what we have here anymore.
Here it's all thrash. It's all thrash or groove metal. And then a handful of black metal bands that showed up recently. But it's mostly thrash and groove metal, which I'm totally fine with. I like thrash and groove metal. Black metal, I think it's more along the lines of hardcore for me. I have a much harder time listening to black metal, but I love black metal shows, so I'm fine with us having a homegrown black metal scene out here.
Yeah, but black metal is like something that I kind of enjoy, not a lot, but like I gotta be really in the mood for it.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a mindset to get into it for sure.
And it's funny you bring up like local scenes because like the Phoenix area has gone through like so many different phases of like what scene is popular. Like when I was going to local shows, it was like all about punk and like the different like subgenres of punk, like skate punk and hardcore punk and shit like that. And then all of a sudden I see like all these like wannabe post-hardcore in the style of like Attack and shit like that. And it's just like, all right, I'm done going to local shows because I don't really like that style of post-hardcore, because my post-hardcore is like bands like Glassjaw and stuff like that. Like the earlier iteration of post-hardcore. But then all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, it's like deathcore bands are like the huge thing. I don't mind deathcore, but like
deathcore's a band or a genre I can get into, which is again strange. Like I just skipped over the building genre.
I like deathcore, but it's just like the Phoenix area, like local scene is just like so bipolar. It's like one month it's this thing, and then the next month it's this thing. I wish every like genre was able to get its just get its scene cemented, and then I just wish every genre got its scene cemented instead of going through these phases where it's pop punk one month and then deathcore the next and then metalcore after that. Anyways, that's that's my little rant about local music.
So we've been talking about metal. You know what we need to talk about more? I'm waiting for you.
What is it?
Waiting for you. Yeah, thank you for playing it on that. We need to talk about more Chrome.
Oh boy.
That's what we need to talk about. Chrome, Dust, and fucking Flames. So I rewatched this on a bus again.
Yeah.
We watched Mad Max. So once again, as per norms, if you don't like spoilers, Mad Max has been out for a couple of years. Specifically Fury Road, which was hinted at in our last episode. So if you listen to the last episode, we kind of screamed about watching Mad Max in the next episode. So here we are, Mad Max.
Yeah.
Well, I've already seen it, so what'd you think?
I loved every bit of it. Everything from the visuals to the minimalist dialogue.
Oh, God.
And just the setting, because I've seen the other Mad Max films, and I was in love with the setting back then, and I'm even more in love with the setting now, just because of the visuals that they have access to that they didn't 30 years ago, which is, I think, when those movies came out.
Just remember, this director took a number of years off of Mad Max because nobody would let him make it, and in that time, he made Happy Feet.
Yep, he made Happy Feet and another animated movie.
Happy Feet, too. Probably other things as well, but, good God.
But I was so happy that, it feels like they just let him go crazy with the budget. The scene where that kind of sets the stage for the rest of the movie, when Tom Hardy, when Max and Furiosa are pretty much sort of fighting alongside each other, but also not at the same time, and they go into that big ass dust storm. As someone who lives in Phoenix and has seen a massive wall of dust just envelop a city, that's kind of what it looks like, but multiplied times 30.
So the cool thing about this movie is the fact that it's all practical effects, right? And I've leaned more and more and more towards practical effects as time goes on. Even with things like Netflix's Stranger Things, I really liked season 1, and I found myself disliking season 2, and I couldn't put my finger on it until afterwards I read that season 1 was all practical effects and season 2 was digital. I watched a clip recently, which was Mad Max before special effects and then Mad Max after special effects, and they're identical. The only difference is the camera positioning and the lighting, because, there's a little bit of post-processing on the effects, but it's just crazy dude on top of a truck with a flamethrower and another guy tied into, this playing a guitar, and then it's just, before effects, and it's exactly the same scene, just, a car driving by.
Yeah.
It's just bonkers. That, there's this reoccurring character who's, breathing fire and playing a metal guitar the entire time. He wasn't able to drink or do anything for hours on end because he was just strapped to this vehicle. And it's if you actually read what that actor had to do to play that part, it's insane.
Yeah, I wonder how much money he made for that role. That's some hazard pay shit. I'd be sitting there I need hazard pay. Come on.
It's what are you doing? You're playing a metal guitar that shoots fire. Also, you're driving at 80 miles an hour down the desert, and you can't pee for 2 hours at a time.
I will agree with you that I'm a huge fan of practical effects. The effects that we saw in Star Wars.
OG Star Wars, right?
Yeah. The effects that we saw in King Kong, or just Kong, which you can go see if you go to Universal Studios in California. You can see the set that they used for the shot when they showed the ship coming up to the island. And it's just this big-ass pool with this little tiny ship in it and this big-ass island. and another one that is on the same tour is where they do a lot of the earthquake scenes, when people are in subways and stuff. it's amazing. Like, I just love practical effects. And not to say that digital effects are bad or anything, but if a digital effect is bad, it is bad. Like, you can tell that it's computer generated. You can tell that the person that was charged with making the digital effects just like threw it off to the side and was like, that's good enough for this, and just threw it off.
Well, it's not even that. It's, for me, the more I look at special effects, the more I dislike them, because it's actually been what's been turning me off of the superhero movies that have all been coming out recently. It's like, well, they're basically filmed in a blue box, and you might as well be watching an animated film at that point. And to an extent, that's fine. You know, you have movies like Avatar, which did a very good job kind of showcasing effects for the time, but that movie's aged terribly.
Yeah.
It's a fine film, but there's many, many, many reasons why practical effects age better. And it's the reason why Alien holds up and is still one of my favorite movies to this day, because, you know, like, yeah, of course, the first xenomorph that just bursts out of the dude's stomach just looks silly, but like, that movie is intense and holds up and looks good because the fire from that flamethrower is real fire.
Yeah.
And that alien's actually in front of them. You know, like, this is just turning into a like effects discussion, but I will always
I like the discussion.
appreciate a film more if they'd use practical effects. And I think Mad Max Fury Road is an excellent example of practical effects, because that's literally the entire movie. You know, like, we could get into spoilers for like Mad Max Fury Road and say everything that happens, but like, realistically, you don't go to Mad Max for the plot. You go to Mad Max for giant vehicles driving around and then a surprisingly strong female lead role.
You go to Mad Max for the action.
You go to Mad Max because that movie gives you anxiety, and then by the time it's over, you realize your abs hurt. Like, I'm gonna stop doing ab workouts and just rewatch Mad Max.
I want to mention the pacing. So, like, the movie, it starts out sort of slow, but it just ramps up and doesn't stop. It has short moments where nothing is really going on, but it's always tense. Like, going into spoilers, when Furiosa gets out of the war rig to talk to, she's held up her part of the deal, at least a little bit. It's slow, but it's tense. Like, the tension is there because they don't answer immediately. You're kind of like left going, oh no, they're not going to hold up their part of the deal.
This movie is extremely edge of your seat.
It is. It's nonstop action.
From the point of view of somebody who gets very easily distracted and bored in movies, like, I liked the most recent Spider-Man, but I'll be honest, I was bored by the end of it. Like, I was just not dozing off, but you know, like, Deadpool was fine, but after the laughs kind of wore off, it was just and that's the same for most movies. But Mad Max just grabs me, and I can't look away for the two hours or so, whatever the running time is on that thing.
It's like 2 hours and 30 seconds or something. Like, pretty much 2 hours on the dot.
Yeah, and it's just an intense rampage through hell, essentially, like a dusty hell. And
pretty much like living in Phoenix. Yeah, if you ever want to know what living in Phoenix is like, just watch Mad Max Fury Road.
So I think that we've kind of covered that, and we could wrap the show up here, but instead of wrapping the show up here, we kind of skipped the drink section at the very beginning because, you know, it's a water night for me, and I don't think you're drinking, so.
I am, but it's something that I've already talked about, so I'll just say that it's brown sugar.
It's brown sugar ale. Well, I do want to talk about or brag about a beer that I had over the weekend, and also mention a show that I went to. So I went to go see In Flames and Within Temptation. Okay. And another band called Smash Into Pieces. I watched two of their music videos, and one of them was fully auto-tuned, and the other one sounded like chord progression and everything like basically every single fucking Nickelback song I've ever heard in my entire life. So I was like, you know what, fuck it, nope, I'm not going to that.
Nice.
Also, you guys look like a bunch of chiseled Swedish men that never leave the gym and wear douchebag hats. I'm not going to this show.
Same.
So I drank through that. But initially, before I went to the actual show itself, I went to my favorite pub, which is St. Augustine's. And I went by myself. I don't normally do that, but I went drinking by myself. I just sat at the bar and just kind of hung out for a bit. And I need to scroll up here and figure out who made it, because I think I posted it. Yeah. So it's a habanero sour. Peach habanero sour.
It looks fucking delicious.
Yeah, peach habanero goza. So it's from Parallel 49 Brewing, which is it's one of the big breweries in Vancouver. Like, they make tons of different beer, and they're always pumping stuff out, and they're very hit or miss. Their stuff's either really bad or it's really, really good, and there's like no in between. This very sweet, like fruity start on that beer, and the finish then comes up your nose with just straight habanero. And it was exceptionally spicy, but not in like a way that made it hard to drink, and it didn't make you choke. Like, you got all of the heat from the spice, but none of the bite from the spice. Does that make sense? So it was just this lovely, kind of awesome, like maybe one of the like best spicy beers I've ever had. Because I've had a ghost pepper stout before, which was kind of hard to drink. Because it was also an imperial stout and like just extremely strong in every way, shape, and form. But this was just fruity and easy to drink, but also warm. Like,
for ghost pepper stout, not even a ghost pepper stout. You said it was an imperial.
It was a ghost pepper imperial stout that I had before. It was a long time ago. I just remember not really liking it. I did finish it though.
Like, that's really heavy. I don't think you should put spice with heavy beer. Like, I think like I think the reason why the habanero goza works is because it's not a heavy beer.
The other interesting thing about gozas is they're brewed with a lot of salt. So it's like it was almost like drinking I don't want to say salt water, because you don't really taste the salt, but it's there, you can feel it. It was maybe the closest thing that I could describe to a beach beer out there. Like, it was just awesome, and I loved it. It was great.
Gozas are like next to IPAs and triples and quads. Like, gozas are my go-to. Like, that just sounds delicious, but ghost pepper imperial stout. Ugh. I love spicy food. And I also would like to try some spicy beer. I wouldn't want it in something heavy like a stout. Like, the goza sounds good. Maybe like an ale or a pale ale.
I'm not going to drag this episode on too much longer, but I also had a Belgian quad at the end of the night. Because there was this guy that I was also talking with at the bar, but he ordered a Belgian quad at the end of the night and told me to order one as well, which I did because I wanted another beer. Well, I won't get too much into it because it's just a pretty standard, it's good, but standard Belgian quad.
Standard quad.
Mm-hmm. And he said that he was an older dude who worked in the diamond industry, which was very interesting talking to him because we were talking about jingles from like 2003 that I remember hearing on the radio that he apparently did the deal to get. But because they're a local chain, and he was talking about how he will only drink beer that has a higher alcohol percentage than the price. Which is why we got the Belgian quad, which was 10%.
Huh.
And it was very interesting to listen to him talk about beer, because I think there's probably some alcoholism going on there, because he was saying that his favorite beer that they had there was a specific Imperial White IPA, which I think actually talked about on this show. It's a Parallel 49 beer. And he was talking about how much he likes it because it's 9.9% and only $6. And said that he had 11 of those in one night once, and they had to cut him off. And
most bars down here would have cut him off probably after the
He stated that he wasn't slurring his words and wasn't causing any trouble for any of their patrons and was by himself at a table, and they should have let him continue drinking. And he was still very spite about that and pointed out the waitress who cut him off. And I'm just sitting here like, Jesus, this guy's nuts.
He's like,
but
that's her over there. Don't let her come near here.
Yeah. He's like, she will cut me off my beer if I have 5. I was like, okay, wow. But no, seriously, sitting at the pub is fun, and I need to do that more often because you get to run into some interesting characters, and it's
yeah, for sure.
It's fun talking to a school teacher in her 40s and a surly old diamond worker in his late 60s, and then just a bunch of people who barely speak English from Spain, which was an interesting conversation. So. But I won't drag this episode on too much longer. Thank you very much for listening to Audio Tapes and Visual Drugs. If you want to get more episodes of the show, if you want to hear them early, you can find them on patreon.com/blindirl, BLINDIRL. If you want to find us, you can find me under the same names on all platforms. All links are below. Where do people find you, Ryan?
You can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Rhinestone, RYNESTONE, as well as on Twitter at dubscheckem, DUBSCHEKEM, kind of like the old meme, check my dubs.
And thank you very much for listening to the show. We're available pretty much everywhere except for iTunes and for various reasons. And we'll see you guys in a week.
iTunes.
I think we'll have our first guest. Peace.